Welcome to Between Two Ellens. I am very happy. We always have great guests, but this one kind of is the reason that I'm in the position I am as a state legislator. I did not take the position away from Representative Walke, but he did hold House District 87 before me. So grateful for your leadership. You did flip that district. Although the prior representative was really good too, so House District 87 has always had some great leadership. And thank you for carving that out for me. Today, you're going to talk about a bill that you've been trying to get passed since, 2020? And it's about data privacy. It seems that that's coming up real quick, all this conversation, especially with us moving forward. So I would like to welcome you, Representative Collin Walke, Between Two Ellens.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation. It's always good to be amongst people who are continuing on the fight. And so I appreciate what you all do day in and day out because I know how rough it is. So thank you for what you do. So data privacy started in Oklahoma in any event in 2019. I was in the House of Representatives and I was reading a book in the lobby by a guy named Roger McNamee, who's a billionaire hedge fund investor who had a hedge fund with Bono at one point in time. And he was also an early advisor and investor in Facebook. And so he was an advisor to Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. And long story short, after the 2016 Cambridge Analytica scandal came out, he had no idea about it. And so wrote this tell-all book about what companies are doing with your data. So I wrote him a letter and said, hey, I want to do something about that in the state of Oklahoma. And he actually befriended myself and Republican, at the time, Majority Leader Josh West, so that we could run this bipartisan piece of legislation, because privacy isn't just a liberal issue. It is a conservative issue as well. Everybody cares about their privacy. You can't have freedom without privacy. And so consequently, that led us into drafting what was at the time and still is the strongest data privacy legislation in the country. So at that point in time, California had one bill, or it had a law, and it was a data privacy law, and it was opt-out. It hadn't actually gone into effect yet at that point in time. And so then subsequent to that, Josh and I wrote our legislation as opt-in, which basically means before you can take my data, I have to tell you that's okay. Right now it's reversed. They can take your data unless you say don't. And so the inconsequence of all of this was we got it passed out of the House 3 years in a row by veto-proof supermajorities, and it kept getting killed in the Senate. And now we are here 5 years later. And my understanding is that a data privacy law will be coming to Oklahoma, and it will likely look very similar to Texas's data privacy law.
Very good.
So, will you walk us a little bit through what is included and what you think that, or at least what Texas passed, and maybe what we could be looking at?
Yeah. So again, I think it's going to be Representative Josh West that's running this legislation, and I told him I'll give him grief. I do support the bill, but I do give him grief because it's fairly weak. None of the data privacy laws in any of the states, to be clear, are very strong. Okay. And so the way Texas's bill would operate is it basically would apply to the biggest data brokerage companies or biggest tech companies in the world. It wouldn't necessarily apply to your smaller or mid-sized companies. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is it will give you more rights than what you have right now. So right now, if you were to email a data brokerage company and say, hey, give me all of the data that you have on me, they can go, oh, sorry, you live in Oklahoma. You don't have a data privacy law. I don't have to give you anything. Well, now this bill will give you the ability to, one, ask what information they have on you. Two, correct that information. Three, delete that information. And then four, sometimes other rights pertaining to that, but very similar in circumstance. So there are little other limited rights that you might have in terms of your data, but that's what it gives you the right to do.
So we talk about, I love that 3 times that you've tried to do this, 5 years. I think everyone should understand that it should be like that in some ways, that we get bills right. It being weak may not be a good seller for this one, but as that goes, how long it took, if it's that weak that we're not passing these privacy laws. But my thing is on the other side, though. What are the dangers without something like this in place?
Yeah. So, for example, most people download apps thinking that they're, doing something good For example, people download Life 360. Why? Because people were keeping track of where their children were and those sorts of things. Well, come to find out, Life 360 was selling the geolocation of children's locations, and quite literally up to within 10 meters of where the child actually was. So this is the type of specific targeting and geolocating that is out there, and that can not only be purchased, but is oftentimes open sourced. So, for example, when you go and you post a photo from your phone to Facebook, there's metadata and geolocation data that's embedded in that. And so individuals can exploit that type of information. Oftentimes people buy Fitbits, right? So now your healthcare data, not protected by HIPAA. I think most people now realize that. So that's sitting out there. So if you're talking with an AI chatbot about mental health, guess what? That's out there because there's no protections that say that that company, you know, whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic, can't just turn around and turn that data away. It's very concerning because it can lead to individuals being exploited financially, faking, deep fakes, all of those sorts of things.
So that's sort of a nice lead into a question I have, that my history with disability and vulnerable adults, always trying to put those protections in. We know that especially our elderly are definitely the vulnerable ones. Why are we not more up in arms about this? Why did it take such a long time for anything to happen with this? Because this seems to be one of those great, like you said, what was it? No freedom without that privacy. What are some of those things that we're not seeing that has caused this to be barriers to getting this passed?
Well, the barriers to getting it passed are twofold. First, to be blunt and to be frank, we love our convenience, right? And what people don't realize is that every single app you download is typically defaulted to have access to your mic and your contacts and all of those sorts of things. So you've got those sorts of things. On top of that, you've got the cybersecurity concerns that exist from that. So, for example, a lot of people use Zelle and money apps and cash apps and those sorts of things. Well, guess what? That's just one more opportunity for a hacker to navigate into your bank account. Right. So, but it's so convenient that we want to download it. And the same thing with Facebook. It's so convenient for social media to just entertain us all day long, right? Irrespective of the fact that, at least as of 2021, if you owned an Android device, TikTok actually had access to your passwords. So, right. So these are things that people don't realize when they're downloading their apps, what types of information they're giving away because of the convenience that it provides them or the entertainment it provides them. The second barrier, though, is on the legislative side, which is to say tech companies only care about money, period, end of story. And so, for example, our bill, like I said earlier, was opt-in, meaning that an individual had to say, yes, you can collect it before you could. And if you go to the App Store now in your iPhone, whenever you download an app, it says ask not to track while only while using, don't track, right? And that Facebook said that the year after that went into effect, it cost them $10 billion in revenue. So it's all about the dollars and cents at the end of the day because people are buying and selling your data. So, for example, there's a company out there called Axiom, and I forget the exact numbers, but it's something to this effect. They have 30,000 data points where you shop, when you shop, what you buy, all of those sorts of things, 30,000 data points on over 1 billion people. And then what they do is they segregate you. They segregate you into what you like to shop for and those sorts of things, and psychological characteristics like, are you an influencer or are you influenced? Why? Because we're going to market to you differently depending on which one you are, right? And so this is you are a very valuable commodity, and they don't want any impediment to them buying and selling you.
So one of the questions I had is, because like the internet is everywhere, right? So it makes it a little bit more challenging, I think. Do you think it's more challenging to solve at the state level? Should this really be a federal issue? And because the federal government's not doing anything, like states are trying to hodgepodge bills together?
No, you're absolutely right. Which is to say, the first argument when Josh and I were running this legislation was, well, we don't want 50 different states with 50 different laws. And so then what they did was they went to Virginia, specifically Microsoft and one other tech company I'm blanking on, went to Virginia and passed a fairly weak data privacy law. And that kind of set the standard for everybody else. And so, yes, the fact that the internet is everywhere means that this should be governed by our federal delegation. But just like with AI, they're not going to do it. And I can make a straw man or steel man argument for why that's justified in today's day and age. But the reality is that something needs to be done more than what we have on the books now.
I think sometimes, that I think that was a big argument that states should be able to, even though it's hodgepodge all over, but states do want to have some of that control, which we are allowed. But so even if we did put this bill in, which, like we said, it's been updated a little bit over the past 5 years, what are we still missing? It seems like we may be behind.
Yeah, I mean, so for example, this still allows you to, be targeted for your marketing and those sorts of things. It just gives you the opt-out rights. And the biggest problem for that is you talk about the elderly, or to be frank, anybody over the age of 50. And it's like, okay, well, how do you set out your browser to do a universal opt-out? Do you even know how to do that? So while you're given rights, it still doesn't really protect you. And not only that, but if you actually put in a more stringent law today, it would actually protect your privacy in the future, even though they have your old data. Why? Because you ain't the same person you were a decade ago, right? And so your data is only as good as the last time you uploaded it. And so it would, help us into the future if we had better and more stringent laws. Especially considering the fact that with AI, we see all the deepfakes that are going on. We've experienced it here in the Oklahoma Democratic Party, and so, these things are real, and it doesn't take much talent or skill to create a deepfake.
You talked a little bit about AI, but I guess I am concerned with how data privacy has changed with AI entering the picture.
Yeah, in fact, it's gotten weaker, both in the EU, which has had fairly stringent data privacy standards. They're starting to talk about stepping those back. They also had a fairly strong AI Act, and that is law, but my understanding is no one's going to enforce it. And so you're absolutely right that AI poses a problem. And the United States has a hands-off policy because the theory right now is this is an arms race. And so we don't want to do anything that impedes the ability to develop what will be the future nuclear weapons of this world. And while there's an argument to be had for that, I don't understand why DARPA and other government-funded agencies can't make that happen as they have historically, just like they did with the nuclear bomb. So you don't have to put this in everybody's hands in order to strengthen it. But the other side of it too, when you talk about data privacy, is what AI allows bad actors to do. So for example, if I used to download 1,000 data sets and wanted to try and cross-reference them, it might take me a week or a month, even on automation. But with AI, that data can now go through and figure out who you are, where you were, and what you did fairly quickly and allow you to be exploited even more quickly.
There's in Oklahoma, there was a poll out talking about the fear of, and I think this ties right. I don't trust it. They don't want to know there's a bill that a moratorium on data centers, we don't want to grow. And I think this does stem from fear. Would you agree? And how do you think that's going to maybe keep us from actually protecting and taking care of those fears?
Yeah, no. So there's a great blog out there that I encourage everybody to check out called AI 2027. So just Google AI 2027 blog. It'll pop up. It's written by several AI engineers, including a former ethicist from OpenAI who created ChatGPT. And they basically walk you through various and sundry events that happen through 2027, at which point in time they predict that artificial general intelligence will exist. Once that exists, you have an AI that's capable of self-replicating and self-improvement. And so you get to choose your own adventure at that stage. One adventure is we really regulate AI, and the other one is we don't. In either event, within about a decade, we're no longer around. But what's interesting about this is if you think back to like 2022, there was a lot of initial excitement about AI, maybe a little bit of anxiety about it, but a lot of excitement, because, oh, look how cool it is, right? And now we're starting to see that anxiety creep in. Well, in this blog, they correlate public opinion with AI, and it is always negative. And it just keeps getting more and more negative as time goes on. And so you're right. It is something to be fearful of because it is something that we do not have control of. No one can tell you why that AI gave you the answer that it gave you. And that is extremely concerning.
It's interesting. The other day, this is a little bit of a longer story, but I went shopping, and at the end it was like you can put in your phone number so they have your receipt and all this stuff. And my kids were like, why do you do that? And I'm like, oh, it makes it so much easier if I need to return something. And but in my mind I was like, what did I just do? What information have and so I am someone who is like pretty strict about like cell phones. We didn't give our kids a cell phone until 13. But it's like the tools after that, even as someone who's kind of grown up a little bit later, old millennial, but like I still don't have the tools to understand, how to interact with data privacy when it's really important and how to be proactive about it. And so how do you talk with people about, and honestly something I think generally people care about, but at the end of the day they don't, it's not like in their top 5 list of some issues.
No, you're absolutely right. And the thing is because every single person says, well, what do I care? Yeah. And the thing is that you should care, not just for your sake, but for your child's sake. I mean, one, we've seen how Grok carried forward. Do what?
That was just gross. Go ahead. The story about Grok.
Story, yeah. How Grok carried forward, the child pornography. And could use your child's images on that. So that should be a big concern for everybody, and not just for you, but for your child. So many parents post pictures of children. You see the Grok child exploitation that happened recently. So it can happen to anyone at any time. On top of that, I mean, I can tell you dozens of horror stories that I know of personally of people who've been exploited via, the old Nubian princess scheme. Send me $1 million and I'll help you do this, and those sorts of things. So it can happen to anybody.
I think that's something that, and I know you might have served with them too, Collin, but people that are just like, no regulation. I'm not going to do that. We don't want to, my freedom or whatever the regulation. But we know, especially in the financial advising world, that there are people, bad actors or whatever, that we have to have regulation until their money's gone, or clearly now privacy. Goodness, I think it's time for a better sort of regulation on that too. I'm not sure, Ellen, have you read any of the new bills that are filed? That I know that there's some people that are trying to do it, but again, it's probably not going to be a complete, it's probably going to be a little weak. Like if we want to do a super ironclad sort of regulation, we may, of course, need the federal government, which may not happen these days. It's not a priority. But what can we do? Maybe something else that we can do. If it is teaching me how to not have anyone, I mean, when you were saying those things, I am over 50, but how do I make sure that everything's protected? Because then in that way, then I can have a little more control in what I know and what I do to protect myself.
Well, so the first thing there is that you want to have an opt-in policy. That's the biggest, safest thing. That's probably not going to happen. But here's the second one. And we've already done this as a state. So we need to go a step further, which is to say, right now, when we pass our health information exchange statute, which is the state's HIE, and this is if you do not opt out. So everybody listening to this, if you go to the doctor, if you do not opt out, all of your data from that doctor's visit gets uploaded to a central exchange, with the ultimate goal of there being a central exchange federalized, so that if you get injured in Washington state, they can know your health history. And that's a good theoretical idea, but it also puts a central repository of 400 million Americans' health data records. I don't personally like that idea. In any event, the point being, within that statute, it says that we have property rights in our health data. And I think there is a strong argument to be had that there's other laws that say our data is our property rights. But the moment you instantiate in statute that your data is your property, anytime somebody takes it, they got to pay you for it, right? So we've created this whole new economy that we're going to need in the future that we currently lack, because in the future, AI is going to replace a lot of jobs and people are going to need further income. And the best way to do that is profit off of who you are, your own data.
That sounds great. That sounds great. I think that I'm remembering about HIE too, that a lot of people still don't know about what they have to do physically to protect themselves.
Yeah. So if you could put it in law that your data is your property, my hat's off to you. That would help a ton. Yeah.
No, I mean, help us out with that. Help us write it. What kind of title do we need to find? Because we've already missed all those deadlines.
What? Explain the HIE a little bit more, because right now there's other like Epic and other. So is it separate from that?
Yeah, it's separate from that. So Epic and those sorts of entities are electronic health records or medical records providers, EMR, EHR providers. Mm-hmm. And so your doctor probably uses them because those sync up with the billing and insurance records and yada, yada, yada. But at the same time, they then plug into the HIE and upload it to the HIE. And in fact, that was one of the initial problems with the HIE program in Oklahoma, was all of these physicians were all of a sudden having to pay more, right, in order to connect to the HIE. And so we created a grant program to subsidize that cost.
Well, there's also talk, which it just is bringing to mind, about Real ID and all the information that is going to have you read about that? That there's a lot of people are talking about Real ID going to some all the information going to some centralized, data center or whatever. This could help if you wanted to opt out of that, correct? Or is that something that there's
because it would be federal. It would be federalized, and you can't. I mean, what most people don't realize is when you go to the airport, you can opt out of the facial recognition when you walk up there. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt, but you don't have to have your picture scanned. They don't have a right to take your biometric imprint, and that's what they're doing. And here's the other side of it. Whether or not, quote unquote, Real ID is ultimately going to lead to a centralized database doesn't matter, because if it doesn't already exist, it's on its way to existing. That's the entire reason why Palantir exists. I have no doubt that, again, there was probably some process towards it, generally speaking. But once Doge came through and the tech billionaires got involved, I have no doubt it's all going into some form of a centralized repository.
I see. Well, it brings up all this other property data, the cameras that are around, is all that stuff. I mean, when you're at a stoplight or when you're outside in a parking lot, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you could, I guess, capitalize or get some money on your data, but we're a long way off from that, correct?
Well, yeah, but here's a great one. Do either of you use a Roomba?
No.
Okay, good for you. Well, anyway, for people who
we have too many stairs. I love the idea of it, though.
For people who use Roombas, what they don't know is that the whole time it's going through your house, it's mapping your house and sending that data back to the mothership about the floor plan of your house. Now, I don't know if this is true in every state, but at least in Oklahoma, you can get the floor plans of your house from the county assessor. Not a huge deal, right? But at the end of the day, that's still information about your home that you could sell, right? But they're getting it for free, and then they're turning around and selling it. So they're profiting off of you, and there's no good reason for it.
Gosh, I just feel like I'm being taken advantage of. I mean, if I want my money back.
No,
but see, here's the thing. We say that, but how many apps could you do away with? How much social media could you do away with? How much are you willing to pay for it in exchange? I think this was like around 2018 or so. There was a New York Times op-ed opinion that I read, and it was really interesting because at the time, the number one indicator of whether or not you were impoverished was whether you smoked. Probably makes a lot of sense. And what the argument in this op-ed is that in the future, the number one indicator of whether or not you're going to be impoverished is whether or not your existence is on social media. And the thought behind that is that, the middle classes and upper classes are going to move beyond that to some sort of paid versions of that, and only the people who don't have money would be exploited.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Gosh, so much. I mean, data privacy, this was not a small conversation, I'll say, because it really has, it doesn't have fear in me. It just makes me more aware, especially since it connects to everything, which reminds me when you brought up geofencing and Life 360, I think of women who with domestic violence, and I say mostly women because that's the majority of the population that does have domestic violence and then be the victims of. But that's a big deal if someone in some way is selling or whatever that information, especially if they're trying to be away from someone who abuses them. So this can really be dangerous, not only with kids that it's location, but when you said within, what did you say, meters or whatever,
In
that's
meters.
pretty darn scary, especially if you're in a violent situation or even a VPO that someone doesn't follow. Good for her to have, good for the victim to have that information if they're close, but not good for someone else to have. Talk to me about how that. I mean, this bill that you've tried to push for years is not going to take care of that. But really, there has to be some other realistic things that we can do.
I mean, the sad part is absent banning the buying and selling and brokering of data, it's
Mm.
just not going to happen. There's no way, given the technology that exists today, and that's the problem, is that, for example, in 1789, no one would have said you had a right to privacy walking down the street, right?
Mm.
But today, the ability for flock cameras or cameras on doors, ring doorbells, and all that to identify you rightfully or wrongfully with other types of technology or infer information about you. For example, your gait is unique to you. So most people don't realize that. And so, they can identify and infer certain things. As far back as 2014 was the famous Target scandal, where a 14-year-old was inferred to be pregnant. They sent her coupons for some pregnancy stuff. Her dad opened the mail, discovered it, blah, blah, blah. But that was as back as 2014, before we even had the ability to use massive amounts of data with AI.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the problem is that, yes, you don't have a right to privacy walking down the street, but you do have a right to privacy to prevent that thing from inferring about you that you're a Democrat, all of those sorts of things, so you can be targeted for other reasons and nefarious reasons. And that's the problem, is that there's just no real way to do it.
Well, I wonder how many apps you have on your phone. I would love to.
Can I give you my favorite example? We'll close with my favorite example because I know you're tired. So if y'all haven't ever seen the HBO documentary Navalny, it's about Alexei Navalny, the guy who ran against Putin for president in 2018. So shortly thereafter, he was on a flight from Russia to another part of Russia and got violently ill, almost died, landed in Russia, was almost dying, transported him to Germany. He recovered. Turned out he was poisoned with Novichok. Clearly, it was the Russians. And before he went back to Russia, he knew the moment he landed, he was going to be arrested and probably spend the rest of his life in jail. And that's what ultimately happened, and he died. But through the dark web, they were able to get his flight itineraries, every single flight itinerary that he was on for the past 5 years. And in that time period, they were then able to cross-reference all of the passengers. Okay, so this is information that was obtained on the dark web, cross-referenced all of the passengers, and found out that there were 5 individuals who were on every single flight that he was on, and they were KGB. And so ultimately, he then called each one of those individuals, and I won't tell you what happened, but if you watch the movie, you'll find out. My point, though, is your flight itineraries. I mean, if people want to find you, they're going to find you. And so that's the problem with not having data privacy regulations and allowing the brokering and selling of our data.
Wow. I'm so happy that you came to talk with us. That's an excellent story to end with. Ellen, do you have another question?
No, that was a great story to end with.
So we do, though, at the end of each verse. So thank you so much for coming. You have one of these lovely ones when we see you, a little nice cup that, of course, we'd love for you to have and show off. But we like to have our guests ask us a question. And so do you have a question for the Ellens?
Yes. So for the HD 88 representative, Ellen, do tell me what you have found most different from your expectations going in.
Let me think. One is, well, so I think it's unique for people who may not know that I was a lobbyist beforehand. And so maybe my greatest like thing that I didn't realize is that legislators have a harder time getting information from multiple sources, like what's happening in the Senate and what's happening in the House. I felt like my lane was like super narrow and I had no idea what was going on in the Senate. And so that made it really hard for me to understand everything. And that we don't have a good data system, I think, for legislators to track bills, which again sounds silly, but we really struggle with as a legislator to know what's up on the floor and everything. And so that was the biggest surprise to me.
And Ms. Hefner, Representative Hefner, what are you most looking forward to this session?
Oh, it's going to be easy, right? No, I should not lead off with that. But you know me, I'm glass half full. So I think that there's change that should happen. I know that there's going to be a lot of talk about education. So if that fills a lot of the air, maybe I can talk about these other things that we need to do, real small fixes to help domestic violence victims, or even dog overpopulation, things that, if we focus so much on one thing, especially during in this campaign year, I'm hoping that it'll all those kind of conversations will be easier to have.
Awesome.
And of course I'll let you know, Collin is very grateful to me when I SOS that you always answer, and I appreciate you and your help always.
Well, thank you both for having me on. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Seriously, we appreciate you raising this issue with our audience.
Awesome.
Yes, and then please, we're in a weather thing going on, which is why we're kind of meeting like this. So stay warm.
Y'all too. Talk to you later.
Bye.